For today's Business Brief, we're joined by Managing Director of Market Economics, Stephen Koukoulas. Stephen, good to see you. We are keeping a very close eye on the housing market, of course. Is there signs of a turnaround?
There's some good news. The auction clearance rates just last weekend rose again in Sydney and Melbourne in particular. They're back into that sort of mid-60s level, which is consistent with prices actually increasing. And it builds on what we've seen since the start of the year, and that is auction clearance rates are starting to edge higher. Admittedly, there's a lower volume of sales, so people are not putting their house on the market quite as much. But the sales are happening, and if we look at the price data that's coming from CoreLogic, prices seem to be stabilising.
Yeah, it's interesting. The New South Wales budget will be handed down today. Of course, Dominic Perrottet will be seeing a big hit, still in surplus, but a hit to New South Wales government revenue. But is there a bit of positivity around? Because I guess the housing market is seeing a bit of a resurgence, so that won't be a long-term hit?
Yeah, look, obviously the prices have fallen in Sydney anyway, and that's, of course, the bulk of New South Wales. They have fallen 15% from the peak. And turnover, which, of course, is vital for stamp duty, they want transactions to happen to get the stamp duty revenue coming from that score. They are still well down. But if we're to think about the scenario for a more optimistic tone, we've got interest rate cuts, the one that's already happened, and probably a couple more over the next 6 months. We do know that new supply of housing is drying up, building approvals are starting to decline, and our population growth is still growing strongly. So on a more medium term, so probably into 2020 and certainly 2021, housing will be doing better then, and just at the moment we're negotiating this low point.
And we are looking at the US Federal Reserve later this week. Why does it matter so much to us here in Australia?
Oh, it matters a lot because for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the US is the biggest or equal biggest economy in the world along with China. So what happens there is a really vital element of global economic conditions, global growth, because if the US does weaken, it drags just about every other economy down with it, including Australia. So the Fed is negotiating evidence of a slowing. The economy in the US is starting to cool off. Some of the Trump fiscal policy spending is starting to dissipate through the economy. Earlier rate hikes from the Fed are starting to impact. So they're going to be seriously considering starting to reverse that policy tightening. So on Thursday morning, our time, we'll get news from the Fed. I don't think they're going to cut at this meeting, but they're going to probably send a signal that rate cuts are coming in the latter part of this year.
Now, there are mixed signals about Australia's economy and where it's headed at the moment. Iron ore prices are up again. That's good news.
Oh, that is fantastic news. The inventories of iron ore at Chinese ports, the stuff they import ready to turn into steel and those sorts of things, have been declining. Some wonderful research from Westpac came out yesterday just showing how weak the inventory levels are, and of course they've got to be replenished. So demand for iron ore, there's a fairly decent pipeline there, and when we saw iron ore a week or two ago hit $100 a tonne, we thought, gosh, that's an incredibly strong number. This morning it's around $110 a tonne. That is exactly double what was assumed at budget time. So the government's going to be doing a little jig and a little dance thinking that they're going to get some decent revenue, and that's going to offset. The domestic economy is still slow, it's still subdued, but this iron ore price and commodity prices are a real boost to the budget bottom line.
Just quickly, the full tax cut package, your advice, should Labor pass it?
Oh, look, just pass it, get on with it. Yes, there are issues for 2025 and what the economy is going to be like and how much it's going to cost. There's no doubt about that. But politically, Labor have just got to get that whip out of the opposition, out of the government's hands, because if they don't pass the tax cuts, I think the government will just keep hitting Labor on the head with being a party that doesn't support lower income taxes.
You're not alone. Stephen Koukoulas, thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
We'll see. Thanks, Laura.